Welcome to our continuing series of virtual voices focusing on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We are very honored today to have Dr. Najmedin Meshkati, who is a professor of civil environmental engineering and industrial and systems engineering, also international relations at the University of Southern California. He is an associate with the Project on Managing the Atom at Belfer Center for Science International Affairs at Harvard Kennedy School, and was a Jefferson Science Fellow and a Senior Science and Engineering Advisor, Office of the Science and Technology Advisor to the Secretary of State, U.S. State Department in Washington, D.C. Over to you, Professor Meshkati.
Thank you very much, Dr. Durback, and good morning from Los Angeles. I'm Najmedin Meshkati. It's an honor for me to be here at World Information Transfer. I would like to salute Dr. Durback and her colleagues and young interns, Susie, Jessica Williamson, and many others that they have had the privilege of being mentored by Dr. Durback. Dr. Durback kindly invited me and asked me to talk about what I know about the situation at Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plants in Ukraine. Let me start by showing you a small PowerPoint that I have. And with this PowerPoint, I hope that you will see what I have in mind over there in this presentation. Let me go back to Zoom, share screen. Okay, this is my PowerPoint, and I go to the PowerPoint, and here is my PowerPoint. I would like first, as an introduction, to talk about this nature of the 6 reactors in the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. These 6 reactors are of the type of the VVER 1000. VVER 1000 is different from RBMK that exploded in Chernobyl. RBMK, I think, is an abbreviation in Russian for graphite moderated water cooled. VVER 1000 is a Russian abbreviation for pressurized water reactor. And that's what I would like to show you first, how they work, because it will have some implication for our discussion about their safety and status. This is the pressurized water reactor, which is a similar type of a reactors that they exist in Zaporizhzhia. All the 6 reactors are like that. As you know, this power plant is the largest one in Europe, and 4 of them were not operational before the invasion, and 2 of them were, I think, operational during the invasion until last week. They had to shut down the last, the number 5, and then only 1 reactor is operational now at a lower power rating. What you see over here, this is an animation which is made by the US Nuclear Regulatory Commission of the pressurized water reactor. I would like first you concentrate on this reactor vessel. Reactor vessel is where the nuclear reaction takes place. And as you see, these are the control rods over on the top, and the fuel are inside the reactor. The fuel assemblies are inside the reactors. And when we pull the control rods, then the nuclear reaction starts to take place, and it generates heat, intense amount of heat. And we try to absorb the heat by circulating water around the reactor. These are this is a pressurized water, the red loop, as you see, that goes around the reactor, absorbs the heat from the reactor. That's why it's called pressurized water reactor. And then This top one part is called pressurizer because we maintain very high pressure over there. This is called primary loop, the yellow and orange one. Then it comes to another tank, which is called either heat exchanger or heat exchanger, for lack of a better term. The primary loop exchange its heat with the secondary loop. This blue one is, as you see, is a secondary loop. The secondary loop water, the cold water or the cool water goes, absorbs the heat from the primary loop, and then it turns to steam, and the steam comes and run the turbine here, and the turbine run the generator, and we generate electricity. And then as you see, then the hot water with the steam, it goes back to the condenser, and over here it gets cooled. We bring the offsite water over here to cool the water further. Some of that water may go, this offsite water, as you see on the left, that goes to the big cooling tower to get cooled. This is a very important concept that I would like you to pay attention. As you see that for cooling the reactor, we need to have the primary loop running as well as the secondary loop running. And for all of these, they require huge pumps and tons of electricity. That electricity for running all these cooling pumps are fed or coming from offsite power. We typically do not use the reactor power for that. That's why the nuclear power plants are very reliant on the offsite power for these two cooling loops. There is also one more point that I would like to pay attention. This secondary loop, which is goes around and absorbs the heat from the primary loop. This secondary cool water is not radioactive. The primary cool water is radioactive. That's why the secondary pool loop water, the blue one, that goes through the turbine and goes back to the condenser, and then that gets cooled from the water that comes from outside. It's not radioactive very much. And as you see that we try to cool down and bring the steam that comes out from the turbine. This could be saturated steam, not a superheated steam. We try to cool it down with the water that we bring from outside. And that is a very important issue. If the outside, which is a lake water that we need to treat that, or a river water that we need to treat that, if that pond, that lake or the river, because of the climate change become hot, then we don't have enough cooling temperature to cool down the steam. And that's why we need to lower the power rating of our reactor. Reactors cannot supply enough power. That is what has happened in France many years ago during the heat wave, and it may have occurred just recently in France. Because the outside temperature is so high, the river water and lake water become so high, and the delta temperature becomes smaller, they don't have cooling. There is also two important other features that I want to bring to your attention over here. The reactor vessel, like the Fukushima, is under the containment structure that you see, that containment structure. This containment structure is a very thick, reinforced concrete dome which is sitting on the top of the nuclear reactor, and this area called containment dome or containment structure. That's the reason for that is for the safety purpose, based on the defense in depth principle. Sorry, if something goes wrong with the reactor, we have a leak in the reactor, leak of radioactive steam, or leak of, God forbid, leak of radiation from the reactor, it is contained in this containment structure. The containment structure is really the last layer of defense, physical layer of defense. Non-physical layer of defense are our operators that I will talk about that later in my talk. This is the last layer of defense that we have for the society, for the population to contain the radioactive release from the reactor. This containment dome work in the case of 3 Mile Island and work to some extent in the case of Fukushima, but this dome did not exist in the case of Chernobyl. The Chernobyl reactor did not have a containment dome. That's what when it exploded, the radioactive material is spewed to the environment. There is also another important character over here that I would like you to look at that, which I will talk about that later in my talk. We need constant cooling while the reactor is on over here to absorb the heat from the reactor. And this cooling is done by these giant cooling pumps that send the water around the reactor for the primary loop and also secondary loop, the blue loop that you see. And if we lose power, that could be a very serious accident. In fact, one serious accident that could happen in a nuclear power, which is called loss of coolant accident, LOCA, loss of coolant accident, which means that we don't have cooling water around the reactor. That's another point that I would like you to remember, which is important for Fukushima. I will talk about that. There is also one last point that I want to make here, and then we can continue. And the last point that I would like to make here while you are watching this is even if when we shut down the nuclear reactor, as happened in the Fukushima because of the earthquake, when the earthquake happens, reactor is cramped, which means that it automatically shuts down itself. It shuts down. However, it's not like your car that you turn off the engine and it shuts off. Even when you shut down the reactor, there is still a lot of heat inside the reactor vessel, and you need to absorb that heat. That's called residual heat. That residual heat needs to be dissipated, which means that we still need to have this cooling pump working. It's not that you can shut down the reactor and then rest in safety. No, we need to have cooling to absorb the heat and bring the reactor after a while to a status which is called cold shutdown. So that's another very important thing that we couldn't do it in the case of Fukushima because we had the loss of offsite power, emergency diesel generator didn't work, and we couldn't bring the reactor to the cold shutdown. Cold shutdown is very important. That's why the last one before the last remaining reactor of Zaporizhzhia, they were able to bring that to the cold shutdown because we still had enough electricity. And that is something which is very important for the nuclear power plants, that to keep this constant flow of electricity when you wanna, after you shut down the reactor, to be able to absorb the residual heat. I hope that you are clear on that. This is the pressurized water reactor, like the VVER 1000 and 1200, or 1200, which is a new version of a Russian pressurized water reactor. There is another type of water reactor that was the type in Fukushima, which is called boiling water reactor. This is that boiling water reactor that you see. As in the case of boiling water reactor, there is no primary loop and secondary loop. It's only one loop, as you see. This water for boiling water reactor goes around reactor vessel. There is no heat exchanger, no pressurizer, as you saw in the other animation. By the way, these animations are made by US Nuclear Regulatory Commission. You can then download them from their website, as it was done by my USC student. In the case of boiling water reactor, again, the water goes around the reactor. It gets to boiling water, and then converts to steam. It comes and turns the turbine and runs the generator, and then it comes back and then goes through the condenser. Boiling water reactors are a little bit older version that pressurized water reactor. There are not that many of them around, and they have some peculiar characteristics. But what we are dealing in Zaporizhzhia is basically this type of reactor.
Dr. Meshkati, could you briefly describe what is the process with the new modern reactors that are now being built?
Yes, Dr. Durbach, to the extent that I know, first of all, this new, there is a new version of the nuclear reactors that are called second or third generation, called small modular reactors. The small modular reactors are still on the design stage, on the drawing board, as they call it. There are different companies around the world, in US, in China, in multiple companies in the United States, China, Europe, South Korea. They are working on that. The basic concept of the small modular reactor is they have passive system, meaning that if the reactor, we shut it down, it could not go to a kind of a runaway reaction, as we happened in the case of Fukushima, or that because of the loss of coolant. The other aspect of the small modular reactor, which makes it very attractive, is they are basically built in a factory in different subsystems and components. I mean, different, think of that there are different modules. They are modular. That's what called SMR, small modular reactor. And they are all built in the factory. You can mass produce them when they come, very much like a generator, like a electric diesel generator, that they are built in the factory. There are big pieces of equipment. There are different type of power rating. You can have a diesel generator for a house, or for a compound, or for a neighborhood. They use that. USAID sent a lot of them to Afghanistan after the invasion of Afghanistan, to electrify the different neighborhoods of Afghanistan. And these are basically big pieces of equipment. They are built in the factory. They take it to the field and they assemble that over there. It's not like these old white elephant nuclear reactors that they are literally custom made. There is a huge cost of construction, lot of piping, balance of plant, they call it BOP, a lot of support services, and that they need. A nuclear plant is really like a big, larger scale facility, industrial facility. A small modular reactor would not look like that. They will be very much like one or two good sized building, and they take the reactor over there in one module and they attach that to the other module, and you can install them at site. There have been a lot of discussion about them and their desirability. They are much lower cost, easier to maintain, and a lower cost to run. But there is a lot of hope for them. As I said earlier, many countries are investing heavily on that. In the United States, Mr. Bill Gates has made a sizable investment in one of them called NewScale, that they are merged with another small modular reactor developer, and they are NewScale and the TerraPower, sorry. Mr. Bill Gates invested in TerraPower, and I think they merged with NewScale, another small modular reactor developer. And it is a very high potential industry around the world. There have been some discussion about their safety. US National Academy of Sciences, they have a committee that are studying the feasibility of a small modular reactor, and that committee has met a few times. They have a public meeting that you can attend via Zoom and listen to the proceedings. Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is the largest nuclear plant in Europe. It includes 6 VVR 1000 reactors, 6 reactors in one site, largest one in Europe. Each one of these reactor power rating is around 1000 megawatt electric. And before the invasion of Ukraine, this 6 reactor used to produce a very large percentage of electricity for the fantastic country of Ukraine. And there are different estimates, and correct me if I'm wrong, between 20% of the Ukrainian electricity generation share was by this one nuclear power plant, 6 reactors. It had great safety record. In fact, there is a report which was filed by the government of Ukraine in 2017 for International Atomic Energy Agency. That's a national report about their nuclear power plants, and also Chernobyl, which is now a place that they had the accident on April 26, 86, and there is still a lot of nuclear waste. This is a report which is available online if you want to know about the background, information, history, inventory, and everything about South Ukraine nuclear plant, Kalmanitsky, and others. Please feel free to download this report, and I can send a PDF of that to Dr. Durbach, and she can share that with you. This is public information.
Thank you.
This plant was working perfect without any problem until early March that Russian forces invaded that. Unfortunately, this plant has been occupied since March, I think 2nd or 3rd, by the Russian occupiers. And the situation has been going south in this plant. First, around March 2nd or 3rd, there was a fire because of the shelling. And then Russians started to bring armored vehicle and troops to this plant and use this nuclear plant as a shield. As many people heard about human shield, that you put some people around your military equipment or guns, and that to discourage your opponent to attack you. Russia has been doing, according to many reports, with this plant. I just fast forward to yesterday, and then I come back. Yesterday, there was a report released by the International Atomic Energy Agency. This is a report, like a trip report based on their visit of Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant last week. The existence of the Russian armed forces, military vehicles, very close, like 60 meters away from a nuclear reactor at Zaporizhzhia, has been verified in this official report by the International Atomic Energy Agency. I will come back to this report later. This one is also available online. You can download that the same way that I downloaded that and printed a copy of this report. The situation at this plant has becoming very serious, more serious in the last month than before. It was occupied by Russian forces around March, early March, but it has been operated by Ukrainian operators, maintained by Ukrainian mechanics, and that, however, they are subject to interrogation and rules of the Russian occupiers. Russian occupiers brought some people from their atomic energy organization to basically oversee the running of the plant. And according to this IAEA report, they have asked the staff for the reports about confidential issue, about aspects of the nuclear plant. Just one more piece of information for you. This nuclear plant has 6 reactors. These reactors were all operational before the invasion. But then they shut down the 4 reactors. They brought it, what we call that, to the cold shutdown. Because when you shut down the reactor, it's not that you shut off your heater and everything becomes good. When you shut down a reactor because of emergency, earthquake, or anything, you still have some residual heat in the reactor vessel. That's why you need to have a cooling system to cool that residual heat. What happened in the case of Fukushima Daiichi, and in March 2011, the reactor got shut down automatically after the earthquake. But we needed to still have cooling. Everything was normal for 45 minutes until the tsunami hit. Was normal because, of course, we lost the off-site power, but the emergency diesel generators, they kicked in. For 45 minutes, we had the cooling in the plant. The reactor shut down in Fukushima Daiichi. And then we had the loss of off-site power because even the nuclear reactors, they generate power for cooling the reactor, running these huge cooling pumps. And also at every nuclear plants, including Zaporizhzhia, we have a spent fuel pool. When the fuel are used and spent in the reactor core, we are taking it out from there. They are still hot. We move them and put them in this spent fuel pool for several years. We need to have constant cooling at this spent fuel pool. And then after they cool enough, they cool down enough, we take it there and put them in the dry cask, dry storage area. What happened in Fukushima, which has some very important relevance for our case as Zaporizhzhia, is this. Earthquake hit, the nuclear reactor shut down automatically, but we had a loss of off-site power because those power lines that they feed the plant, they were toppled by the earthquake. It was okay. We have emergency diesel generators. Emergency diesel generators kicked in. For 45 minutes, everything was okay. We were able to bring the reactor. We were expecting to bring the reactors, the operating reactors, which were 2, I think, or 3 at Fukushima, to the cold shutdown. But then the tsunami hit. The tsunami inundated the plant after 45 minutes, and tsunami water started to inundate some of those emergency diesel generators, inundate the cooling pump of some of those emergency diesel generators, and inundated the switchboard of some of those emergency diesel generators. Make the story short, we lost emergency diesel generators power. Then we had a situation which is called station blackout. When you don't have absolutely no electricity in the plant, you have some batteries as a contingency just to run the instrumentation of the control room. But the place that the batteries were there in Fukushima, that got inundated. We have something which is called total station blackout. Now look at Zaporizhzhia. Because of the Russian occupation and the shelling, all these off-site power lines that were coming to Zaporizhzhia, they have been cut off. Basically, as we speak today, Zaporizhzhia do not have based on my information, and yesterday, UN Security Council emergency meeting, Zaporizhzhia does not have any off-site power coming to it. 5 reactors are shut down. Only reactor number 6 is working at a low power rating in order to generate enough power for inside the plant. Why we need enough power for the inside of the plant? Because of that 6 huge spent fuel pool that we still have that inside the plant, and we need to cool them down. The spent fuel pool are not under the containment dome where the reactors are that could protect them from external shelling. We need constant cooling at this plant indefinitely, even if we bring reactor number 6 to the cold shutdown. But we don't have off-site power. That's why they keep reactor number 6 operational at the lower thing just to produce enough power for this. But if the reactor number 6, for whatever reason, have to be shut down, then we are at the mercy of these emergency diesel generators. Emergency diesel generators are huge, clunky, old, unreliable, finicky, and anything equipment. They kick in, they run. However, their purpose is for emergencies, as the name emergency diesel generator means, meaning that they have to run maybe for a few hours until we can reconnect the off-site power. Emergency diesel generators also depending on the fuel, diesel fuel. At Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, according to International Atomic Energy Agency, we have 2,250 tons of diesel fuel. 2,250 tons of diesel fuel. May sound a lot, but remember, this diesel fuel could be attacked from outside. They could catch in fire, or we could have breached the containment tanks, and we may lose the fuel. Besides that, we have this unreliable piece of equipment that their purpose is used only during the emergency. According to my information, I think from this Ukrainian government report to IAEA 2017, I think, if I'm not mistaken, there are 3 emergency diesel generators per reactors, meaning that we have 18 emergency diesel generators. Having 18 doesn't give me a sense of comfort, because then if they may have a problem which is called common mode failure. If there is a bad element, bad subsystem, bad piece in one of these emergency diesel generators, it may cause problem and shut down with the others. Anyway, this is as far as the physical infrastructure of site power, and that is to the plant. What I am most interested in, which has been my research in the last 35 years in nuclear safety, I've been to Chernobyl, as you see the photos over here, in 1997, when reactor number 3 was operational. It was 11 years after 86 accident. Reactor number 4 was involved in the accident. Reactor number 3 was operational in 1997 that I visited. My biggest problem is the state of operating staff. These Ukrainian heroes, these operating staff of these nuclear plants, they are really the heroes of Ukraine, I think. And because of that, they need to be really, these are unsung heroes. They are not at the front fighting the invaders. They are hostages in the plant, working literally under the gunpoint, in a lot of stress and duress. My research for the last 35 years in nuclear safety has been dealing with the issue of safety culture and human factors in nuclear power plants. And what I tell you now why I'm more concerned. Shelling may stop today, Will stop today. But as long as this plant is under the Russian occupation, my worry still is high. And why? If you look at the history of the nuclear power plants in the world, we have three major nuclear plant accidents in the history of the world. Three most noteworthy ones that everybody referred to that. Three Mile Island nuclear power plant accident in the United States on March 28, 1979. Three Mile Island, March 28, 1971 in the United States. The second one, Chernobyl nuclear power plants in Ukraine, April 26, 1986. At that time, it was part of the Soviet Union. And Fukushima, Daiichi and Daini nuclear plants in Japan on March 11, 2011. Three major nuclear accidents in the history of the world. Two out of these three accidents, they were caused by internal factors. Three Mile Island, Chernobyl. Only Fukushima was caused by external factor. However, the external factor, according to our research, worked as a triggering mechanism. There were many internal issues at this plant, which was not the fault of the operators. It was the fault of the owner utility, TEPCO, Tokyo Electric Power Company. Let's talk about these first two. Two out of the three were caused by internal factors, human performance, safety culture. Apply these lessons to Zaporizhzhia. These heroes, these Ukrainian hero operators, they're running this plant under tremendous duress, tremendous stress, fatigue, while their family is living few kilometers away in Energohodar city, which is under the shelling. They cannot do shift rotation. They are subject to interrogation by Russian occupiers. They are taken to the basement of the plant. Just last week before IAEA delegation to go there, they were force-feeding talking points by Russian occupiers to tell what, not to tell what, and that they are subject to stress and fatigue and cumulative fatigue. What does these do? Stress, fatigue, cumulative fatigue increases the human error probability by manyfold. And look at Chernobyl, look at Three Mile Island. They were caused by human factors issues. Let me read two or three small statements from IAEA report. Under the operating staff, they say, quote, they are under unbelievable pressure, unquote. There is increased anxiety and pressure on the personnel, unquote. Constant high stress, unquote. Under extremely stressful condition, unquote. And it goes on and on and on. This is the report of IAEA released yesterday from their visit of last week. There is a concept in nuclear power industry which has been used in other safety critical industry called safety culture. US Nuclear Regulatory Commission has a policy advisement on safety culture developed by the Institute of Nuclear Power Operation, has been adopted by International Atomic Energy Agency, translated into many languages. I have a copy of that booklet over here, Traits of Healthy Safety Culture. This thing has been used all over the world. I was in Laguna Verde nuclear plant in Veracruz, in Mexico, and the superintendent showed me a copy of this booklet. Traits of Healthy Safety Culture. There are 9 traits of healthy safety culture. One of them is respectful work environment. The other one is environment for raising concern. All of these 9 traits, questioning attitude, all of these 9 traits have been breached. And now you understand why I'm so worried. As I said, even if the shelling stops today, this situation continues. And now let me go on a limb a little bit. There have been 3 emergency meetings of the United Nations Security Council in the last month and a half. I have watched the live stream live, and like last night, I re-watched yesterday's 2.5 hours live stream. There are some statements from that captured my eye, and I noted that here and here. Let me read that to you. Director General of International Atomic Energy Agency, Mr. Rafael Mariano Grossi, he visited with 14 or 13 of his experts last week, Zaporizhzhia, under a lot of problems. He went through the war zone and that. In my humble judgment, Director General Rafael Mariano Grossi and the IAEA deserve the Nobel Peace Prize because of what they are doing in order to save the world. This is what Director General said yesterday at minute 33 after the beginning of UN Security Council emergency meeting. Quote, "We are playing with fire. Something very, very catastrophic could take place," unquote, at Zaporizhzhia. We are playing with fire. Something very, very catastrophic could take place in Zaporizhzhia. The United Kingdom ambassador said something very interesting yesterday at the minute 45 minutes after the beginning of the meeting. That's on the live stream. She said this: operators of Zaporizhzhia are no longer workers, but hostages, unquote. These are very sober statements. And by the way, throughout my research on 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, Fukushima, and I've been to 16 other nuclear plants around the world, including, there's a photo of them here, EBR-2 reactor in Idaho Falls. Nuclear plant operators, I believe, and they have demonstrated that, they are the first layer and last layer of defense of the society against a catastrophe. They are there to detect an anomaly on the plant, and address that. And if something goes wrong, the accident propagates through the system, they are there to mitigate its effect and stop it before it gets to the environment and goes over the fences. That's why I'm more concerned about the state of the mind of these operators, these heroes, Ukrainian heroes. I would encourage you to listen to yesterday's live stream, which is available on the UN TV. The clip is available. The speeches were beautiful. The speech by the Albanian ambassador was one of the best ones, in my humble judgment. It was thorough, delivered succinctly, and it was very factual. But the problem, my problem with the UN Security Council meeting, I'm sorry to say that, and I said that yesterday in an interview with Deutsche Welle, with all due respect to these nice diplomats with their suits and cufflinks and nice ties, and the ladies with nice attires. This was the third act of the theater of the absurd that I watched.
Excellent.
They just come and talk. The Director General of IAEA comes and makes a beautiful report at every one of these things, including yesterday. Then the floor is given to Russian ambassador. which I just want you to listen to his speech. I don't want to say anything. Any rational mind on the face of this planet should listen to his speech, listen to Albanian ambassador's speech, and listen to Ukrainian ambassador's speech at the end. Then make a judgment for yourself. 3 speeches. This is what I call it. It was a theater of the absurd. They failed to do something. Now the Secretary General of United Nations, Mr. Antonio Gutierrez, and he calls for what they call that protection zone against Zaporizhzhia. Protection zone is a euphemism for demilitarization. Secretary General Gutierrez has asked for this a month and a half ago when he was in Hiroshima for the anniversary of Hiroshima. Immediately it was rejected by Russia. And then they are asking for this protection zone with the knowledge that Russia is not gonna acquiesce. And this morning, US Ambassador to United Nations, Ambassador Thomas, on National Public Radio, just an article, said we are pressuring Russia. I don't know how can you pressure a superpower. You need to have an active diplomacy. And the other thing is, unfortunately, in my judgment, United Nations Security Council has relegated its responsibility for international peace and security to this technical agency, which is called International Atomic Energy Agency. IAEA in its core, by its nature, by its job definition, is a technical assistant and a technical inspectorate to look after the NPT and safeguard. IAEA is not designed, is not equipped and capable to do peacemaking and high-level diplomatic negotiation. As I said, Rafael Grossi and his staff, they deserve a Nobel Peace Prize for the technical work that they do. But I do not think the present structure and the resources of IAEA is good enough for the task that United Nations Security Council should be doing. My suggestion, as I made at the end of my commentary article, which I brought to Dr. Durbach's attention, it has been translated into 7, 8 languages, including Norwegian, Latvian, and Spanish, Catalan, and Portuguese, and others. My suggestion, since many months ago, is that UN Security Council need to empower a special commission, as they did in 1999. They did that before the war with Iraq. It was called United Nations Monitoring, Verification, and Inspection Commission. It was a special commission to deal with Iraq at that time. Unfortunately, President George W. Bush preempted that and didn't let them to finish the work. And that commission was headed by a very internationally prominent statesman, Dr. Hans Blix. Hans Blix was the Director General of International Atomic Energy Agency in 1986 for many years. And when the Chernobyl happened in 1986, he personally became involved. He still commands a lot of respect in Russia and Ukraine. My suggestion is Security Council needs to be proactive. Do not only ask and rely on IAEA to do this peacemaking initiative. They need to empower this commission, special commission, and find a person of Hans Blix character, caliber, and mold, appoint as the head of that. Hans Blix lives in Sweden. He could be an advisor, but he's in retirement. Fantastic gentleman, one of the most, he's a legendary Director General of IAEA. And then let this commission deal with this vexing, complex issue, because I do not think IAEA can do it. And just coming for the fourth time to the Security Council with another report, the fourth act of this theater of the absurd would not help Ukraine and would not help Europe.
Thank you very much, Dr. Meshkati. That was an absolutely brilliant presentation. You brought in the history, you brought in the ramifications of the Russian invasion, which are threatening the world. And you brought in the problem with the Security Council, and people do not know that when they have a tyrant that is trying to destroy another nation, they need to do more than just talk. So I'm just delighted that you were able to bring out all of these points. And I'm turning now over to Susie so she can answer. We have loads of questions that have been sent to us. So I do not want to take more time in talking. But again, thank you very much. Let's go to the questions so that we can utilize your expertise in answering it. Susie, first question.
Thank you, Dr. Meshkati. And as Dr. Durbeck mentioned, we have a lot of questions, so we'll get through what we can in the 10 minutes, and then I'll email you the rest to see if you can provide responses. So our first question here is, an explosion at a nuclear power plant threatens not only Ukraine, but the whole world. So what will be the consequences of the explosion for the entire world on the environment and neighboring countries, in your opinion?
That's a very good and tough question to answer. After the Chernobyl accident, as you know better than I do, the fallout traveled all over the world. And then the city of Gomel in Belarus right now, which is across the border, that got one of the heavily damaged places, because when the fallout spewed from the Chernobyl reactor and started to disperse, when it got to over the city of Gomel, it rained, and it brought a lot of radioactive material over there. Because of the Chernobyl accident and the spread of the radioactive fallout, there was a saying that came, it said a nuclear accident anywhere is a nuclear accident everywhere, because the radioactive fallout, they don't recognize political or geographical borders, and they transcend borders. If, and God forbids, if there is a radiation release at Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, I do not think because of the reactor, or maybe because of the reactor, but reactors are under the containment dome. The raison d'etre of the containment dome, which Chernobyl did not have it, is exactly to prevent, if there is something going wrong with the reactor, this thing, they don't get out, they don't breach the containment dome. My biggest worry is that these 6 huge spent fuel pools that we have over there, which are not protected under the containment dome. As what's going to happen to the world, that depends on many factors. It depends on the type of the explosion, what type of isotope gets released, amount of isotope, the wind direction, atmospheric condition. Really, it's very hard for me to answer that question in a sensible way.
Next question, Susie.
Thank you. How do you think we can make the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant safe? Do we need support from the forces of Ukraine, NATO, the UN, other countries?
My simple answer, which could be very thing, get the Russian out. Get the Russian out. I mean, this plant was safe. He didn't have any problem. He didn't have. See, one thing that baffles me is the Russian ambassador say, we are there to protect this plant. Protect against whom? against its owner? This is really stupid.
And what do you think we should do in a situation where the IAEA is unable to exert at least some influence on Russia, and it seems almost impossible to impose sanctions?
That's another excellent question. I teach a course called Engineering Diplomacy, which I developed. This thing needs to be done through back-channel diplomacy and through that appointment of that special commission by UN Security Council and back-channel diplomacy.
Thank you. So they'll have to check that. And so the next question is, what do you think political leaders should be doing now?
I think in 2 weeks, there is a
General Assembly.
In 2 weeks, there is a General Assembly of UN Security Council. The schedule has been out. It will start with a speech traditionally by representative from Brazil and then United States. I think this is a forum. They should put this thing up to the top of their agenda. And pressuring Russia, being honest with you, I don't think it's going to work. They need to have an active back-channel diplomacy if it's mandated by UN Security Council. That's the way it should be. I think we have a golden opportunity in 1 week in New York City because of the beginning or the opening of the General Assembly of the UN Security Council that all these diplomats are coming. I heard the visa for Russian delegation, Mr. Sergei Lavrov and his delegation has not been approved yet. I think they should come and an active back channel and formal diplomacy, both track 1, track 2, and track 2.1. It needs to be started on that.
Is it necessary to evacuate people from the territory of the power plant?
Being honest with you, that's a decision that President Zelensky should make. I don't know.
How can we avoid human error in the oversight of nuclear reactors? Is it possible to automate processes without human intervention?
No, because all these softwares and algorithms that are written to automate a system, they could fail. In fact, we have a very big research area and a tremendous track record about this on cockpit automation. There have been some aviation accidents. The last one was the Boeing 737 MAX, that there was a problem in the automation and the human factors related issues of maneuvering characteristic augmentation system. We need to learn from aviation industry. Automation does not solve the problem with human error, it just displaces the human error.
Interesting. What was your reaction to the fact that the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant was disconnected from the Ukrainian energy system? And do you think it's safe to connect it to other power systems like the Russian power system?
Unfortunately, the situation of Zaporizhzhia was these 2 reactors that they were operational until 10 days ago. They still produce enough electricity for 4 million Ukrainians. And now that reactor, one of the other 2 remaining was shut down, and there is the reactor number 6 is working. Being honest with you, it defies the raison d'être of Zaporizhzhia to serve Ukrainian people. There is a lot of discussion about Russia wants to cut off this nuclear plant from the Ukrainian grid and connect that to supply their occupied territory and Crimea. That is something that could be a dangerous thing. But this is another thing that needs to be discussed in that track 1, track 2, and 2.1 diplomacy, hopefully with Russia. There are so many things that are going on, which is beyond a simple nuclear safety related issue. It touches upon diplomatic and political discussion.
Dr. Meshkati, I would like to ask you probably your final question. Can you comment on the possibility of building the new modern small nuclear reactors, and to what extent that will be able to solve most of our climate change problems?
That's a fantastic question. Small modular reactors are now the hope for the future. Many organizations, many prominent people like Mr. Bill Gates, he has invested a lot of money in a company called NewScale. And there is another company, I think NewScale merged with another company that they are building small modular reactors. Many countries, they are trying to collaborate on development of this small modular reactor. Just this morning, there was a news that Romanian government and Polish government, they signed a memorandum of understanding of that. The small modular reactor could be the hope for the future of the solving this problem with the climate change and decarbonization of energy. However, there is still the pending safety issues. There is a very important report by the Union of Concerned Scientists written by Dr. Ed Lyman called "Small is Not Necessarily Beautiful." And that's why we need to consider that, try to resolve their safety problems, because who could have thought when we were proliferating nuclear power before the 3 Mile Island accident, they said it is too cheap to meter the nuclear power. Then we have these 3 catastrophic accidents. Because we did not figure it out, we didn't look at the human factors and safety culture issue. I hope we don't repeat the same mistake with the small modular reactor and get them designed safe from at the design stage and run them safely, and not to repeat the mistakes that we had with 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and Fukushima. There is a quote, and I want to end my talk with that quote, is by George Santayana, who was a philosopher, US philosopher. He says, those who ignore history, they are forced to relive it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Meshkati. Thank you, Susie, for your hosting. I would like to remind you the next week we have Dr. Barry Levy as our speaker, who will be talking about the psychological and medical effect of war. And in the meantime, I wish you a very good week. Goodbye.